What does the most dangerous woman in Mexico look like? You know the Sinaloa Cartel, El Chapo, El Mayo, Los Antrax, the deadliest hit squad in the entire Mexican drug war, responsible for torture, beheadings, bodies strung from bridges, and hundreds of murders across Sinaloa. A killing machine so feared that even rival cartel bosses refused to speak their name out loud without lowering their voices. But what if I told you that when the man who ran that squad got arrested, when the Mexican government and the DEA finally took down El Chino Antrax, the person who allegedly stepped into his shoes wasn't a battle-hardened sicario with a body count. It wasn't a general, it wasn't a warlord, it was a 27-year-old woman from Culiacan with 3 kids, a nursing degree, and 294,000 Instagram followers. Meet Claudia Berenice Ochoa Félix. Known to the narco world as La Emperatriz de los Antrax, the Empress of Antrax, she wielded pink and gold AK-47s. She posed on private jets and yachts with designer handbags draped over her shoulder. She kept lions and leopards as pets. She survived at least one assassination attempt where a woman was mistaken for her and killed in her place. She moved through the cartel world like a ghost, always present, never officially confirmed, always one step ahead of anyone trying to put a name to what she was. The Mexican government called her a social media personality. The cartels called her the Empress. The streets of Culiacan called her untouchable. Today we go inside the full story. The girl who grew up in one of the most dangerous cities in Mexico. The woman who married into cartel royalty. The figure the world came to know as the Kim Kardashian of organized crime, and the mysterious night in September 2019 when all of it ended in a private home on an island in Culiacan, and whether that ending was as innocent as the official story claims. This is the story of Claudia Berenice Ochoa Félix, alias La Emperatriz de los Antrax, the most glamorous figure in the history of Mexican narco culture, and possibly the most dangerous woman nobody could ever officially prove existed. Let's get into it. Claudia Berenice Ochoa Félix was born on January 15, 1987 in Culiacan, Sinaloa. If you don't know Culiacan, you need to understand what kind of city this is. It's the capital of Sinaloa State. It's also the birthplace, the headquarters, and the spiritual home of the most powerful drug trafficking organization in the world, the Sinaloa Cartel. This is the city that produced El Chapo, the city where El Mayo Zambada's children grew up, the city where narco culture isn't something you see on the news. It's the water you drink, the air you breathe, the way conversations go quiet when certain names get mentioned at the dinner table. Claudia grew up in a neighborhood called Canaco, a middle-class residential area in the city. Not a shack, not poverty, a real home, a real family, a real childhood by most measures. She attended the Colegio de Bachilleres de Sinaloa for high school. She was ambitious enough to enroll in nursing school after. By every surface metric, she was on a perfectly normal trajectory. But Culiacan doesn't let normal be simple. In a city where the cartel isn't an abstract news story, but a daily reality, where the most powerful men in the state are traffickers, and the most visible displays of wealth come from drug money. The line between civilian and cartel world is thinner than outsiders understand. It doesn't take a dramatic choice to cross it. Sometimes it just takes meeting the right person. For Claudia, that person was Juan Carlos Félix Gastelum, known in cartel circles as El Chavo Félix. El Chavo wasn't street level. He was a security chief for the Sinaloa Cartel, a man who ran protection operations for some of the most important figures in the entire organization. And then he made a move that elevated his status even further. He married Teresita Zambada, one of the daughters of Ismael El Mayo Zambada, the co-founder and most enduring boss of the Sinaloa Cartel. That marriage made El Chavo Félix family. Literally, cartel family, and Claudia was his wife. She had 3 children with El Chavo. She was living deep inside the inner circle of the most powerful criminal organization in the Western Hemisphere. Not on the edges, not as a distant relative, but in the household of a man directly connected to the man who had run the Sinaloa Cartel for decades alongside El Chapo. That was the world Claudia Ochoa Félix grew up into as an adult. And then she met someone who would take her even deeper. His name was Jose Rodrigo Arechiga Gamboa, and in Sinaloa, everyone knew who he was, El Chino Antrax. He was born in 1980 in Culiacan, raised in the same streets, the same culture, the same orbit as Claudia. He had grown up close to El Mayo Zambada's sons, childhood friendships that became professional ones when he started working for the cartel as a bodyguard for Vicente Zambada Niebla, El Mayo's eldest son. In 2008, when the Sinaloa cartel split from the Beltran Leyva organization and the drug war in Sinaloa went from a business competition to an open military conflict, El Chino Antrax did something that would define the next decade. He founded Los Antrax, named after the bacterium, built like a special forces unit. Los Antrax became the Sinaloa cartel's most feared enforcement arm. Personal bodyguards and hit squad for El Mayo Zambada himself. They didn't just move drugs, they waged war. They tortured rivals and strung their bodies from bridges. They conducted raids that left dozens dead in a single afternoon. They wore diamond-studded skull rings that became their calling card, the way a signature gets left at a crime scene. El Chino Antrax ran all of it, and he and Claudia became romantically involved. The exact timeline of when their relationship began and what it overlapped with is murky in the way that everything in this world is murky. What is documented is the result. Claudia Ochoa Félix was connected to two of the most powerful men in the Sinaloa cartel ecosystem simultaneously. Her ex-husband, El Chavo Félix, who had married into El Mayo's family, and El Chino Antrax, who ran El Mayo's personal assassination squad. In the world she occupied, that wasn't a scandal, that was a resume. Then came December 30th, 2013, the day everything shifted. El Chino Antrax walked off a KLM flight from Mexico City at Amsterdam Airport Schiphol. He was traveling under a fake name, Norberto Siqueiros Garcia. He had undergone significant plastic surgery to change his appearance. He had attempted to alter his fingerprints. Despite all of it, U.S. law enforcement, working through Interpol, had tracked him there, confirmed his identity through forensic techniques, and was waiting. Dutch police arrested him at the gate. The head of Los Antrax, the founder of the Sinaloa cartel's most elite killing unit, the man who provided personal security for one of the most wanted drug lords in the world, was taken down not in a firefight in the mountains of Sinaloa, but in an airport departure lounge in the Netherlands. He was extradited to the United States, booked into federal custody in San Diego, and charged with conspiracy to distribute methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, and marijuana. He pleaded guilty in March 2015. Los Antrax was now leaderless. And within months, the rumor that would define Claudia Ochoa Félix's public identity began spreading across Mexican media, British tabloids, and social networks worldwide. La Emperatriz de los Antrax had assumed command. By 2014, Claudia Ochoa Félix was a phenomenon, or someone built it for her, which is a question that never got fully answered. The photos were the foundation. Starting in 2013, images circulated on social media that showed Claudia living a life that looked like a narco fever dream. Private jets, yachts in blue water, sports cars in the driveway, Ferraris, BMWs, Lamborghinis, designer handbags that cost more than most Culiacan residents made in a year. She posed with lions. She posed with leopards. She reclined in pools on properties that looked like five-star resorts. And in the same photo set, she'd be holding a gold-plated AK-47, barrel pointed at the camera, expression completely unbothered. Pink AK-47s, gold AK-47s, military camouflage AK-47s. The guns were never far. She looked like Kim Kardashian, not vaguely, specifically. The same dark hair, the same features, the same aesthetic of weaponized femininity deployed across social media for maximum impact. The comparison spread globally. Mexican newspapers picked it up. International outlets ran with it. The Kim Kardashian of organized crime became her second nickname, layered on top of La Emperatriz. But she wasn't just beautiful and well-connected. According to people inside cartel circles, and according to the Whisper network that functions as the real press in Sinaloa, Claudia wasn't just photographing herself with guns for the aesthetic. She was allegedly running operations. Los Antrax in the period following El Chino's arrest, did not collapse. The unit continued. According to reporting by British newspapers and sources inside Mexican law enforcement, Claudia had moved into a leadership role, coordinating the group's activities, maintaining the relationships that kept Los Antrax connected to El Mayo Zambada's power structure, and using the social media presence as a deliberate image operation. The Diamond Skull Ring crew was still working. The hits were still happening. The cartel's enforcement arm was still intact. What had changed was who was running it. In Culiacan, her name started getting spoken in the same tones that narco bosses' names get spoken. Never too loud. Always with the implicit understanding that words in this city travel further than you intend. She was also, allegedly, a target. In the months after El Chino's arrest, sources in Mexican media reported that at least one assassination attempt had been carried out against Claudia, and that the assassins had killed the wrong woman. A woman who had been mistaken for Claudia, whose resemblance was close enough to fool the gunman, was killed in her place. Claudia survived. Her following on social media surged in the immediate aftermath. Thousands of new followers drawn by a mix of fear and fascination. In any other world, you survive an assassination attempt and you go into hiding. You lower your profile, you disappear. Claudia Ochoa Félix posted more photos. She also put out a newspaper ad claiming to be a legitimate businesswoman who had nothing to do with organized crime. She held a press conference in June 2014, flanked by her children and her brother, and read a prepared statement declaring that the social media accounts linking her to Los Antrax were not hers, that the photos attributed to her weren't even of her, and that she was a victim of a defamation campaign that had put her life in danger. The press conference was the kind of move you only make if you're either completely innocent or so confident in your protection that official denial is the cleanest option available. In Culiacan, those two things are sometimes hard to distinguish. What was not in dispute? By the end of 2014, Claudia Ochoa Félix was one of the most recognized faces in Mexican narco culture, more internationally famous than most actual cartel bosses, more photographed than most capos who had been operating for decades, and still entirely free, entirely uncharged, and entirely unconfirmed as anything other than a woman with controversial social media accounts and powerful friends. The narco world had never seen anything quite like her. To understand what Claudia's day-to-day existence looked like at the height of her notoriety, you have to understand what Culiacan's cartel elite actually lived like. This wasn't scarcity. This wasn't hiding in bunkers and moving between safe houses in darkness. The Sinaloa cartel at its peak controlled operations across 28 of Mexico's 32 states, ran distribution networks in 50 countries, and generated billions in annual revenue. The people at the top didn't live like fugitives. They lived like royalty. The nightclubs of Culiacan, Mazatlan, and Guadalajara were their courts. Tables surrounded by armed bodyguards. Bottles that cost more than the monthly wages of everyone else in the room combined. The best restaurants, the best hotels, private flights between cities, horses, ranches, animals that you'd normally only see in a zoo. Claudia was in the center of all of it. She was a fixture in the clubs that the cartel elite frequented, always surrounded by armed men, always photographed, always carrying the dual identity of glamorous woman and alleged commander. Her Instagram documented a life that read like a checklist of narco aspiration. Here she is, on a yacht off the coast. Here she is, in a private jet. Here she is posed with a custom weapon that costs more than most people's cars. But there was another layer to what her photos communicated, and it was deliberate. The guns weren't decoration. In narco culture, publicly displaying weapons is a statement of power. It says, I am protected. It says, I am untouchable. It says, whoever might be thinking about coming for me should look at this photo and think twice. When Claudia posed with a pink AK-47 for 294,000 followers, she wasn't doing it the way a pop star does a photo shoot. She was advertising her security arrangement to anyone who might be calculating whether she was vulnerable. And the social media accounts themselves, whatever their true origin, functioned as a form of narco branding that the cartel world hadn't really seen in that form before. Los Antrax were already famous for their diamond skull rings, for the songs commissioned about their exploits, but Claudia put a face on it. A specific, recognizable, globally viral face. The Empress wasn't just feared in Sinaloa. She was talked about in news articles in the UK and the US and Europe. The story expanded. Reports emerged that Claudia had been living in Argentina, specifically in Nordelta, one of the most exclusive gated residential communities in Buenos Aires, for approximately 3 years. She allegedly kept a full security detail, had access to a private plane, and maintained a polo horse ranch on the property. She was living the kind of life that ultra-wealthy Mexicans flee to Argentina to live when they want distance from whatever is happening back home. What was happening back home was increasingly volatile. The Sinaloa cartel was fracturing along generational lines. El Chapo's sons, Los Chapitos, were building their own fentanyl empire and operating with increasing independence from El Mayo Zambada's old guard. The cartel that had been one unified structure was becoming something more complicated. The loyalties that had kept people alive were being renegotiated in real time. In that environment, being the face of Los Antrax, publicly, visibly, internationally, was a particular kind of exposure. And then, back in Culiacan, the world that had made her famous started closing in. One of her last public social media gestures said everything about where her loyalties actually sat. In the months before her death, she publicly posted a photo of herself wearing a Chapo 701 brand hoodie, a clothing line launched by Alejandrina Guzman, El Chapo's daughter, and personally tagged Alejandrina to thank her for the gift. A woman who claimed to have no connection to the cartel world was publicly thanking El Chapo's daughter for cartel-branded merchandise on her verified social media account. Whether that was defiance, tribute, or something else entirely, only Claudia knew. It is the night of Friday, September 13th, 2019. Culiacan, Sinaloa. Claudia Ochoa Félix is 32 years old. She is a mother of 3. She is one of the most recognized faces in Mexican narco culture. She is alive, which, given everything, is already remarkable. That night, she attends a gathering in the city center of Culiacan. She is accompanied by a man whose identity is described only as a companion, a man whose name authorities obtain but do not publicly release. They drink. The night moves the way nights in Culiacan move for people like Claudia, in private spaces, surrounded by the specific kind of luxury that comes with being connected to the right people. In the early morning hours of Saturday, September 14th, she and the companion retire to a private home in the Pontevedra development on Isla Musala, a private residential island inside the city of Culiacan, accessible only to residents and their guests. This is not a random location. This is the kind of address that costs money to have access to. They continue drinking. The night extends into early morning. At some point, Claudia stops responding. The companion tries to wake her. She doesn't respond. He calls paramedics. When emergency services arrive at the private home in Pontevedra on the morning of September 14th, 2019, Claudia Berenice Ochoa Félix is pronounced dead at the scene. She is 32 years old. Her 3 children are now motherless. The Sinaloa State Attorney General's office moves quickly. Prosecutor Juan José Rios Estavillo confirms the death and addresses what everyone in Culiacan is already asking. Was she murdered? His answer is direct. The cause of death, he says, is suffocation from bronchoaspiration, choking, derived from the intake of alcohol and other substances. The autopsy performed by the Forensic Medical Service of Sinaloa supports this finding. The companion, who had been with her all night, provided information to investigators. Authorities rule out assassination. They rule out foul play. It is officially an overdose. But in Culiacan, official stories and complete stories are rarely the same thing. The mystery doesn't start after the official ruling. It starts in the hours immediately following her death, when Claudia's social media accounts, Instagram, Twitter, are suddenly set to private or deactivated entirely. Not by family, not by the platform. Someone, somewhere, is scrubbing her public presence before the news even fully breaks. The questions pile up fast. The first story that circulates in Culiacan's informal information networks, the blogs, the Borderland Beat forums, the WhatsApp chains that carry narco news faster than any newspaper, is that the companion who was with Claudia that night was not just a friend. According to this version, he was an operator for Los Chapitos, El Chapo's sons, who at the time were in the middle of a brutal internal power struggle against El Mayo Zambada's faction of the Sinaloa Cartel. In that reading, a woman connected to Los Antrax, historically loyal to El Mayo's camp, dying under ambiguous circumstances in the company of a Chapito operative, is not a coincidence. It is a conclusion. Then there is the assassination attempt that preceded her death by weeks. Reports had emerged in August 2019 that Claudia had narrowly escaped being killed, that gunmen had opened fire on a woman matching her description, killed her, and only realized afterward they had gotten the wrong target. Claudia survived. She said nothing publicly, and then, 6 weeks later, she was dead anyway, in private, with an unidentified man, in a gated island community in the most cartel-saturated city in Mexico. There was also the matter of what the Bronco aspiration finding actually means in practice. The official cause, choking on vomit or inhaled fluid while unconscious from alcohol and drugs, is a real and documented way to die from overdose. It is also, and this is the part that Culiacan streets could not let go of, one of the cleanest ways to make a murder look like an accident. You don't need a gun, you don't need a blade, you need someone unconscious and a few minutes alone. The state attorney general ruled it out. No investigation was opened, no charges were filed. The companion walked away having provided his statement. Her body was turned over to her family. She was buried south of Culiacan. Her social media accounts never came back. In death, Claudia Ochoa Félix became something she could never fully be in life, confirmed. When she was alive, she existed in a permanent state of official denial. She wasn't a cartel boss. She wasn't the leader of Los Antrax. She was just a woman from Culiacan with controversial Instagram posts and the bad luck of resembling a celebrity and knowing powerful men. Deny, deflect, survive, that was the operating mode. In death, the denial collapsed. Not because any investigation proved what she'd been doing, but because the outpouring of reaction made the performance of innocence irrelevant. The cartel world mourned her openly. Narco social media lit up. Her photos circulated again, this time as tribute. The girl with the pink AK-47, the girl on the private jet, the girl who stared down the camera like she was the most untouchable person in any room she'd ever walked into. She became an icon overnight. Drake's name came up within hours of her death. Fans who had followed both of them on social media had been circulating claims for years that the Canadian rapper and the Empress of Antrax had been following each other, exchanging messages, that Drake, famous for his appreciation of certain types of power and beauty, had been drawn into Claudia's orbit. When she died, his name trended on Twitter alongside hers. He never confirmed it. He never denied it. The rumor lived in the space between those two silences, which is exactly where narco mythology lives. Then, the people around her started dying too. El Chino Antrax, the man who had founded Los Antrax, the man at the center of Claudia's story, had been released from U.S. federal prison to house arrest in March 2020. He had served 7 years. He had allegedly cooperated with U.S. law enforcement during his sentence, providing information on his former cartel associates. On May 9, 2020, less than 2 months after his release, his probation officer reported him missing from his residence. On May 15, 2020, he was found dead in Sinaloa, shot. His body wrapped in cloth, his head covered with a black plastic bag, found in an abandoned SUV on a dirt road east of Culiacan, the city where he had grown up, where he had built his empire, where he had been one of the most feared men alive. His sister was in the car with him. Her husband was in the car. All three had been abducted, tortured, and executed. He had come back to Sinaloa after cooperating with U.S. authorities, and the Sinaloa Cartel had killed him for it. The two most central figures in Claudia's story were now both dead, both gone in 2019 and 2020, both inside the world that had made them famous. Here is what Claudia Ochoa Félix's story actually reveals underneath all the glamour and the AK-47 photos and the Kim Kardashian comparisons. She existed at the intersection of two things the cartel world had never quite combined before: the traditional narco power structure, marriages into cartel families, loyalty networks, enforcement units, and the emerging reality of social media, where image became power in a new and different way. She didn't just live inside the narco world, she broadcast it. She turned it into content. She made Los Antrax globally famous in a way that no DEA press release and no drug war documentary had managed to do. Whether she was genuinely commanding operations or living in the glow of men who commanded them, or both simultaneously, as the most honest answer probably requires, she understood something about the moment she was living in that most of the men around her didn't. In 2014, followers were currency. Visibility was armor. Being the most famous person affiliated with the most feared hit squad in Mexico meant that disappearing, you had a cost. For a while, that calculus kept her alive. And then, at 32 years old, in a private home on an island in Culiacan, on a Saturday morning in September 2019, it didn't anymore. 3 children lost their mother, an icon lost her body, and Culiacan gained another ghost. The narco world is full of men whose stories end in burning vehicles and roadside ditches and military operations that make the news for a day and then get forgotten. Claudia Ochoa. Félix's story ends in a private bedroom, officially from alcohol and drugs, with questions nobody in authority was interested in pursuing. Which ending is more mysterious? The roadside ditch or the bedroom? The guns or the silence? In Culiacan, they already know the answer. Claudia Berenice Ochoa. Félix went from a nursing student in Culiacan to the most photographed woman in Mexican narco history. She began as a girl from a middle-class neighborhood who married into the wrong family. She ended as La Emperatriz, a legend, a ghost, and an unanswered question wrapped in designer clothes and armed with a gold-plated rifle. She never officially admitted to anything. She was never charged with anything. She was never officially confirmed as anything other than a social media personality with powerful friends and controversial photos. And yet the two men most central to her story, El Chino Antrax and the world he built, are both gone. The cartel that made her famous has fractured into a civil war. The life that looked untouchable from the outside turned out to have the same expiration date as every other life in that world. Claudia just made it look more beautiful on the way there. Subscribe to Inform Secreto to continue exploring the hidden stories behind power. Real stories told unfiltered. Because what you don't see also controls the world. See you soon.